So I'm Phil Clawson. I run a corporate responsibility and sustainability strategy consultancy called CSR Lab, in between my in-house CSR sustainability EI type leadership roles. And what gets me up in the morning? Yeah, I mean, other than the alarm clock, which is the expected answer, I'm passionate about making the world right for everybody and making and creating a just and regenerative world. So that gets me up every morning. That plus I have to feed my dogs and take them out at some point. Funny personal surprising thing about me, moderators should think about this before they ask silly questions of their panelists. Let's see. I started. I co-founded a gay flag football league 22 years ago in Boston for LGBTQ and allied folks. Actually, I've known Dan long enough that I recruited him as an ally to come in and help us at the quarterback ranks in the early seasons before he moved out of the Boston area. So, not to overshare something for you too, but there's a hidden connection on the panel. All right, Pamela, let's go to you.
Hey, can you hear me okay? Good morning. It's still morning, right? Well, yes, it's still morning. Good morning, everyone. I'm Pamela Alexander. I'm Director of Community Development at Ford Fund, which, if you're not familiar with it, is the philanthropic arm of Ford Motor Company. Not to be confused with Ford Foundation, which is separate, no relation. I'm going to get a t-shirt that says that. So Ford Fund is based out of world headquarters when it's open in Detroit. I'm from Detroit, and I direct our grants to nonprofits throughout the U.S. So any philanthropic investment we do in the U.S. is something that I direct strategically. What gets me up in the morning? I love not having to use an alarm clock since we're working remotely. You just kind of wake up and throw on your fuzzy slippers. But what gets me up is, again, I have a passion for helping people see the possible. Nothing's more frustrating to me than someone who's not realizing their fullest potential because either they can't see it, you can't be what you can't see, or they don't have the resources or there are barriers to them reaching it. So what keeps me going is helping people see the possible and then removing the barriers that are preventing them from getting there. Personal surprising thing, I was trying to think of one. Okay, so one of the 2 or 3 things that's really left in my bucket list is I have this fascination with Mount Everest. I don't want to climb it, that's for the professionals, but I do want to hike to base camp, which is interesting because I'm deathly afraid of heights. So that's an interesting thing about me. That's the next thing on my bucket list, but my family's saying, no, don't go. So we'll see.
That's a very brave thing to do for someone afraid of heights.
Well, it's just base camp, so it's not really high, but it's high enough. But
right?
I just have a fascination. I have to go there at some point in my life. So
it's like a walk to the beach. You'll be fine.
Yeah.
You don't actually feel the height when you're climbing it. It's
right.
Base camp. Yeah, it all just feels like you're getting higher on a flatter surface in most parts of it. So we'll talk.
Have you done this? Okay, well that's a side conversation.
I have. We'll do it. We'll do it together again.
Look at all these connections. I love it.
Wow.
See, this is right there.
Hazami, take it away.
All right. So my name is Hazami Burmata, and I am the chairperson and founder of the Humanity Lab Foundation. And we exist to disrupt the status quo and primarily to unlock human potential to create equitable and a more just world. So my fun fact is I went from attending a UN refugee school to working for the Secretariat at the UN, and have experienced all different walks of life, which makes me so passionate about the work that we're doing to really disrupt the sector. And what gets me up in the morning is I would ditto a lot of what Pamela said. It's really realizing that there's so much passion and potential in the world. There's so much talent. There's so much technology. There's so much of everything. How can we, in essence, leverage all of that to get the resources to the right places? And I don't mean just financial resources. That's a lot of what I try to deconstruct, is that there's so much human passion that has so much power to it that's not being coupled with the places that need that passion. So that's what gets me up and keeps me going when sometimes it's hard, but proud to be here with you all. Thank you.
Oh yeah, thanks, Hazami. Great to have you both. Daniel.
I'll share both what keeps me up at night and wakes me up in the morning. What keeps me up is the question of why do people do what they do, especially around the things that matter, doing good things for the world. And what wakes me up in the morning, other than kids knocking on the door, is finding that answer a little bit at a time. And that's actually what my company does, Valutus. We make tools for companies to be more sustainable, more just. We make measures, and we help companies to be catalysts. Because one of the things that helps people to do more that matters to them is measures. It's one of the things that motivate people. It's not the only thing by any means. It's one of the things. And also it just happens to be something I like. So as an example of my funny thing, I actually have a podcast with my colleague called Data Driven Drinking, 199 Proof. And this just goes to show just how much I'm nuts for numbers, I suppose. But we've tried about 500 different kinds of gin and tonics and about 400 different recipes for margaritas. And we're over 300 for dark and stormies.
I've listened to a couple of episodes of the podcast. It's more hilarious than it sounds. and also useful if you like to drink, or if you know somebody who likes to drink. It's good for present mining. Gil wants to know what you've learned from all that drinking. I want to know what you've forgotten. I want to know what you've forgotten from all that drinking. Great. Well, thank you all for introducing yourselves. It's a really we had a great prep session and call for this, and everybody's got amazing insights and different perspectives on this topic. So I'm excited for us to dig in here. I want one more piece of audience participation here. So if you haven't done so yet, if you toggle over to polls for the session, if you toggle to session from event, there's 2 questions. In the past 5 months post George Floyd, how well do you feel your company has responded in the moment? Or to the moment, and then what best describes your primary affiliation, large company, small, NGO, et cetera. Right now, we're about 50-50 with large company and SMB startup sole proprietorships. And we've got a spread for how well the company has responded, from neutral to well to very well, with a preponderance on neutral. So for folks, and a poorly or two. So if you feel brave and want to exercise some bravery, my follow-up question to you to add to the chat here would be, if you didn't give a 4 or a 5 on that answer, what's missing in your company's response? What are the gaps? What hasn't happened yet? And we'll consider this Chatham House rules. So what's said here stays here, so people can share honestly. No tweeting what people said, please. And even if you did get a 4 or 5, even if we've responded really well, there's always more to be done. Right. So feel free to share some of those things that you wish or that are next in the chat here. Great. So we're gonna, just to give you an overview of how this session is mapped out, we've got it in thirds, basically. The first third, each of our panelists is going to have 5 minutes to share their perspective on this topic with you to kickstart and get things going. The second segment will be a fireside chat where I ask each of them a few questions. And then the third segment is the audience participation segment, where we answer questions from the audience. And as a moderator, I have a promise that we will actually get to audience questions if there are some. So add your questions in the chat. Feel free to +1 each other if you really think it's a great question. And once we get to that section, or maybe pepper them throughout if it makes sense, we'll make sure we ask as many of your questions as we can. So to get us started, I just want to kick off and set a little bit of context. So when we all sorts of different acronyms for diversity, inclusion, equity, belonging, justice. The one that Sustainable Brands has been using of late is JEDI, but there's also DEI and DNI and DEIB, and it's a little bit of an alphabet soup, just with 5 letters. So we do love our acronym space. So But just to set the context, we're going to be talking about all elements of that acronym, JEDI, and from different perspectives. So as companies, we're thinking about JEDI goals and targets for our employees, but then also for our supply chain, for the impact of our products, for our customers, for our community, for society. So just to set the context that everybody has different perspectives, and we obviously couldn't cover all of that, but there'll be different elements of each of those being covered throughout here. So if you're getting through part of it and you're like, wait, I really wanted to hear that other thing, pop it in the chat and we'll be sure to address that as well. Sound good? All right, so Pamela, why don't you kick us off? I'm going to hand the mic to you,
Okay.
when it's been about 5 minutes, just so that we can keep things on track. And
Right.
the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Again, good morning, everyone. I'm not going to show any slides today. I just kind of want to give everyone a few of my high-level thoughts. I want to make sure we have plenty of time for discussion. I think that's going to be really, really interesting. I don't know how we're going to do this an hour. That's why I want to keep it brief. But I want to start off just kind of stressing the importance of the external and the internal when it comes to measuring and succeeding as it relates to JEDI. A lot of companies immediately go to those internal measurements. What are my numbers? What do my numbers look like? And that's very important. But I'm going to speak both about the external and the internal, because who you are as a company, and obviously I'm an externally focused person in terms of what I do. Who you are as a company, especially in today's world of ESG and investments and shareholder value, that's becoming increasingly important. And how you present as a company externally in terms of measuring how you're measuring and how you are being measured is as important as internally. So I guess I'll start off externally. It's interesting. It comes down to authenticity. I keep saying that with a capital A, authenticity, leading to action. Do your words stand up to examination? Whenever I speak with leaders of national organizations that are very much engaged, whether it's social justice or environment, they all say words are nice, but, and then there's a pause, right? Externally, in terms of measuring what you're doing and how you're being measured, people are smart, they're savvy. Recently with some of the social justice issues, there were a lot of companies that came out with statements. And that's important and that's good. And that is one standard of measurement. Are you out there? Are you projecting what your company believes in, or in some cases, what you will not allow? I always say that as important externally as it is to what you say what you stand for, it's equally important to say what your company will not stand for. That in itself is also an important differentiator. But people will also check to make sure whether there's a history there. Is there authenticity to what you're saying externally beyond that statement? So when you're looking at how you measure yourself and how you're being measured, look at the authenticity and think of it like a selfie stick, right? If you flip the switch on that camera phone and you're looking at yourself instead of looking out, what do you see, right? Flip that selfie switch. It can be a challenge in terms of, as we relates to external measurement, there's some obvious ones, but which I'll talk about in a bit, but think about it as your impact. How will people see your impact? Because that will be to a large extent how you will be measured externally when people are looking and saying, is there a DEI, is there a JEDI statement? Is it really who they say they are? Is that how they're presenting themselves? Is that the shadow they're casting externally? Internally, it's not about quotas. Can't say that enough. It's not about quotas. It's not about just numbers. It's about the quantitative and the qualitative when you're looking to measuring, understanding who you are and who you want to be. I'd like to start with the qualitative because, again, I say a lot of companies sometimes kind of go immediately to the numbers, in terms of understanding where you are. Listen. Can't stress the importance enough about listening, hearing the voice of your employees. The fact that you are doing that listening, that is something you want to measure in itself. You know what I mean? You want to measure how you are hearing, how you are performing with your employees. What are they telling you? What are your employees telling you about the challenges and the barriers? You need to measure those and track those, but you also need to measure the degree to which you are getting that input, because that's a whole part of the process. When it comes to quantitative, that's kind of where a lot of people tend to go. A lot of companies are doing audits right now. That's very key, understanding your current state, being honest about what your weaknesses and your strengths are, and step back and look at your Jedi as someone externally would look at them. You know, I kind of laugh because sometimes you'll see companies that say, oh, we're really out there, we want to do D&I, and then they flash a picture of their company leadership and there's not a bit of diversity on it, right? So step back and take a look at how someone else would see you, and do that measurement. And then you use those qualitative and those quantitative to inform your plan, because ultimately what you want to do is measure the progress of the plan. It's numbers again, but it's broader than that. What tools, we talked about seeing the possible, what tools have you put in place? Mentoring program, listening sessions, you know, upward mentoring. You know, we have some companies where they have employees mentoring their senior leadership to give them exposure. If the tools aren't there, the progress won't be. So after you do your analysis externally and internally, put the external and internal tools in place and measure progress against those tools. What are you hearing from those listening sessions? What are you hearing from these mentoring? Are people participating in these upward mentoring sessions? But also, I want to stress the importance of, and this is all very high level, when you're doing this, make sure it's consistent with your company. If your Jedi efforts and measurements are not consistent with who you are as a company, it doesn't resonate as well. So measure what you are doing relative to who you are. I'll give an example. I'm not saying anything political, but I think it was it CVS that stopped selling cigarettes, their pharmacy, right? That is looking at health issues, and they stopped selling cigarettes. That's their space, right? So is what you're doing in your space is authentic to who you are? Only you know who you are or who your company is. But make sure that you're being authentic to who you are as a company as well. If you do that, if you flip that selfie camera, if you really make sure you're focusing on the qualitative and the quantitative, externally and externally, I think you've got a pathway to success. So with that, I'll kind of step aside and pass it on to my fellow panelists.
Love it. Thank you so much, Pamela. That's all incredibly insightful and helpful. Plus one, plus one, plus one, plus one. Hazami, handing it off to you. You've got a great perspective on this, and love to hear your take. Oh, you're muted though.
Kidding. Thank you
Is
so
this
much.
thing on?
Yeah. Hello. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you so much for go ahead and jump right on in. And I do have a presentation because I like to visualize things. So, you know, as we come and gather here today, one of the biggest things that I've noticed through the numerous years that I've been working with corporations and really helping advise on CSR strategy is the fact that we don't ever anchor ourselves in the purpose of why we're here. I always like to start by really going through, where are we as a world? You know, we talk about social impact strategy, we talk about CSR, we talk about sustainability, but for what? To what end? And you'd be shocked how many senior leadership meetings I have been in where I ask people, what does gender equity mean to you and the board? And everyone just kind of looks at each other. There's no fundamental start point on how these not only are defined for companies, but how they're internalized and actually then brought to life. And I think fundamentally that's a massive failing point, because we're not setting ourselves up to really have the same reference points when we're talking about what we're doing. So we're living in a world where we have 65.5 million people that are forcibly displaced. And actually this number is more like 70+ million at this point. 8 million metric